Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Invested in Queensland Tourism Investor Forum. I'm Charisse Mullen, the Assistant Minister for Treasury and your MC for today. To begin, I would like to respectfully acknowledge the traditional owners on whose lands we meet today and pay my respects to elders, past, present and emerging. Can I also acknowledge our host for today, the Honourable Cameron Dick MP, Treasurer and Minister for Trade and Investment, as well as the Honourable Sterling Hinchliffe MP, Minister for Tourism, Innovation and Sport, and Minister assisting the Premier on Olympics and Paralympics Sport and Engagement. I'd like to also welcome our guest speakers and panellists and extend a very warm welcome to our virtual audience. We have multiple cohorts joining us today, comprising areas such as accommodation, attractions, entertainment, developers, investment, government, and various industry bodies and associations based throughout our state. We have a number of Queensland Trade and Investment Commissioners joining us today from 5 different countries, representing Europe, Indonesia, China, Korea, and the Asean region. Welcome to our commissioners. I'm very excited about this forum today, which is the 4th in a series of forums we began in 2021, targeting specific industry sectors. This forum is part of a broader investment engagement strategy that the Treasurer has embarked on, and it has included investor roundtables, interstate investor roadshows, and will culminate in the Queensland Investment Summit scheduled for later this year. Working alongside the Treasurer, I've had the privilege of meeting with many individuals and companies who play a big part within our investment portfolio, hearing directly from them about the incredible opportunities, but also the challenges that lay ahead. Critical to our economic recovery is attracting investment into our priority industries and sectors. This helps create jobs, drive economic growth, and innovates our industries and people. The tourism sector, the focus of today's Investor Forum, is an important and constantly growing and evolving sector for Queensland. Our state's geographical position, our reputation and diversity of the services provided are just some of the key advantages that Queensland provides and which has placed us ahead of many other regions. No doubt there will be a greater emphasis placed in this sector now that passenger travel is increasing again as we emerge from the COVID-19 pandemic. This forum will provide an update on tourism opportunities in Queensland, where those opportunities are, and why our state is a great place to invest. Today's forum will run for approximately 90 minutes. You will hear from our host and other dignitaries, including the Tourism Minister. We have a very strong panel of speakers joining us today with extensive expertise and knowledge in the industry. This is your opportunity to learn, engage, and ask questions. To set the scene, let's begin with a short video highlighting Queensland's investment opportunity. Following the conclusion of the video, we will hear from our host for this forum, the Honourable Cameron Dick MP, Treasurer and Minister for Trade and Investment.
G'day everyone and welcome, and thanks for being part of today's Invested in Queensland Tourism Investor Forum. Can I begin by recognising the traditional owners of the land that we gather on. Yesterday I started the day in Cowan, 2,218 kilometres away from where we are in Brisbane today, on the land of the Wik-Munkin, Lama Lama, Ayapathu, Umpila, Kanju and Olkolo people, and today we meet on the land of the Yagara and Turrbal people, and I pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging, as I pay my respects to Indigenous people and acknowledge them if they are participating in this forum, either in this room here in Brisbane or online. Can I acknowledge my parliamentary colleague Sterling Hinchliffe? Unfortunately, Sterling's been out on the pilot boat, getting on board the cruise ship to bring it into dock at the new International Cruise Ship Terminal today. He's done a great job. We put on a magnificent Brisbane Day to welcome the first cruise liner into that $170 million new piece of infrastructure in Brisbane, and that will be the start. That will be the start of hundreds, if not thousands, of cruise ships that will bring hundreds of thousands of people to our state. And Sterling will be with us a little later. He's our Minister for Tourism, Innovation and Sport, and he assists the Premier on Olympic and Paralympic sport and engagement. Can I acknowledge my good friend, also my partner in delivering our tourism and our trade and investment program as part of my job as Minister for Trade and Investment, Cherise Mullen, my Assistant Treasurer. Can I acknowledge all of the TIQ Commissioners online? Tom Calder, our Asean Trade and Investment Commissioner, Ryan Freer in South Korea, Ben Giles in Indonesia, Julianne Nichols in China, and our Agent General in London, Dave Stewart. Great that we've got all of those Trade Commissioners online with us today. So if you are participating online, you know that our team in Trade and Investment Queensland is ready and waiting to assist you in your tourism investment, either in Queensland or overseas. I want to acknowledge all of the speakers and the panellists we've got here today. We've got a great panel, people who are really leading in this space for Queensland. I'm looking forward to the forum rolling out today, and I look forward to meeting a lot of you in person when we host our inaugural Queensland Investment Summit, which will be later this year. The events of the past 2 years have demonstrated conclusively that a strong economic recovery can only be built on the foundations of a strong health response. Fortunately, our state's health response to COVID-19 has been world-leading, and because of this, our economy has rebounded strongly. Our robust economy is supported by greater consumer confidence, with household consumption in Queensland up 6.2%, higher than it was in March 2020, and retail spending is up 25.5% since the start of the pandemic as well. Just yesterday, the National Accounts revealed that over the 12 months to March, state final demand in Queensland, which is a very important indicator of domestic economic activity, state final demand grew by 5%. This was beaten only by Victoria, and let's face it, off a very, very low base. We also beat the performance of the nation as a whole. This is one of a number of economic indicators, particularly jobs growth, that demonstrates that Queensland either leads Australia or is ahead of the pack. And when it comes to jobs growth, Queensland has added more jobs than any other state or territory since March 2020, with 145,500 more Queenslanders in jobs today than there was before COVID. In fact, we're just short of New South Wales and Victoria combined. Together, those two big states, representing more than half the Australian economy, we are only 20% of the Australian economy in Queensland. Those two big states have only generated 147,000 jobs together. We're just shy of them. So it just shows you that Queensland is the big jobs generating powerhouse of the nation. And when it comes to exports, well, Queensland has now ticked over. We are now a $100 billion trade and export economy. But what COVID did, though, we know, had a impact that was variable across the Queensland economy. And our tourism sector perhaps copped the hardest blow from COVID-19. The most damaging and immediate impact was felt on our state's tourism industry. That's why our government stepped up straight away to assist Queensland tourism operators with a range of support measures enabling businesses to do their very best to push through the pandemic and to focus on the future. Our government committed more than $1.1 billion in COVID-19 economic recovery and support initiatives, which included $137 million for tourism and hospitality hardship grants, $25 million to support Queensland's tourism icons, more than $144 million to support Queensland's tourism and hospitality workforce, and millions of dollars in focused support for industries like marine tourism and international tourism in particular. And we did all of this because our government understands that investment in Queensland tourism operators, infrastructure and our tourism workforce helps to build resilient businesses and regions and create new Queensland jobs. And as the world reopens, we are committed to supporting our tourism sector to become stronger than ever. 2020-2021 data shows Queensland's tourism sector was worth $7.5 billion to our state and directly employed 120,600 Queenslanders. Many of those jobs, very importantly, are in regional Queensland. Significantly, more than 90% of tourism businesses in our state are small businesses employing less than 20 people. Their role is anything but small. It is important and critical to our state, particularly our regions. These businesses in many parts of our state are at the heart of those local communities. Thankfully, we're already seeing evidence of our tourism businesses building on the support received during the pandemic, the confidence generated by Queensland's robust economy, and the incredible excitement generated by Brisbane's successful bid for the 2032 Olympic and Paralympic Games. Hotel occupancy rates are returning to pre-COVID levels, and there's been a significant increase in domestic tourism spending. The latest data shows domestic spending in February was $1.3 billion, a 22% increase on the same period from 2019. And Queensland's reputation as a world-class major events state was further solidified over the past 2 years, with sporting codes flocking north to keep competitions going. We are a humble people in Queensland, but let's face it, without Queensland there would have been no NRL and no AFL. Brisbane's Suncorp Stadium was, of course, you can laugh if you're in the audience here, there's no problem with that. Just because we're online doesn't, they're all laughing. Brisbane's Suncorp Stadium was, of course, the perfect backdrop for the historic 2021 NRL Grand Final. And when the pandemic meant New South Wales couldn't host its share of the 2021 State of Origin series, we stepped up and put on all three games in Townsville, in Brisbane and on the Gold Coast. And I want to thank Sterling, who's now arrived, for his work in pulling those major events to Queensland and supporting sport at a difficult time for our people and a difficult time for our nation. It gave us something to look forward to each week, and that we could host three State of Origin and the NRL Grand Final. First time ever it's been held out of New South Wales, and hopefully not the last time it's held out of New South Wales. I think was a great tribute to our people and what we're capable of. Our credentials when it comes to putting on world-class events are unquestionable. That's just one of the many reasons Queensland remains a must-visit destination. Our government's investment support and facilitation program for tourism has seen many great outcomes as well. Our $200 million aviation fund is the largest of its kind in Australia and is helping attract more direct international flights to Queensland. Brisbane Airport Corporation, who are with us today as a panellist, will attest to the value of this fund and the role it plays in ensuring Queensland remains Australia's most attractive gateway for international air travel. Earlier this morning we also celebrated, as I said earlier, the opening of our new $177 million international cruise terminal and the arrival of the first cruise ship into the port of Brisbane. That new international cruise terminal has the capacity to accommodate the largest cruise liners in the world. It can welcome up to 760,000 passengers a year, and we anticipate on reaching those numbers in coming years. And the $25 million Growing Tourism Infrastructure Fund announced last December has supported the opening of Dreamworld's newest attraction, the Steel Taipan. One of my great achievements as Minister and Treasurer was to open the Steel Taipan. I didn't ride on it, but the people lining up to ride on it were really looking forward to it. That investment alone, I'll designate Sterling to ride for me next time. That investment alone, or maybe the Assistant Treasurer, that investment alone will deliver a $30 million boost. One investment, one ride, $30 million boost for the Gold Coast economy. On a slightly smaller scale, but nevertheless significant, the ribbon was cut 3 months ago on a $9 million super yacht berth at the Southport Yacht Club. A signature project of the Spit Master Plan, which I released in May 2019 as the then Minister for State Development after one of the most detailed, comprehensive and successful community consultation programs in Queensland history. That new piece of marine tourism infrastructure will help anchor Queensland as an Asia-Pacific super yacht hub. Growing super yacht activity has the potential to contribute more than $2 billion a year to the Queensland economy. However, government is not the only one investing, as you'll hear from today's panellists. All proud tourist ventures and infrastructure enablers who have chosen Queensland as the place to invest and do business. Like Village Roadshow, who recently invested more than $70 million in their state-of-the-art slide and splash precinct at Wet and Wild, just down the road on the M1 at Oxenford. This investment has supported 200 local construction jobs and will support 16 operational jobs ongoing. I thank Village Roadshow for being here today. Just speaking to Clark, an amazing statistic he told me about. April this year wasn't just their best April, wasn't just their best month, it is their best in 2021. It was 2022, either of those years, it was the best month ever for Village Roadshow. And that gives me great confidence that we are coming back out of this pandemic stronger than ever. And I want to thank Clark for being here today, along with the other panellists and the guest speakers. Before I conclude my time with you, I'd like to circle back to something I mentioned earlier, which is, of course, the Brisbane Queensland 2032 Olympic and Paralympic Games. Being named as a host city for the Games has already put Brisbane and Queensland in the world spotlight. In fact, on the 22nd of July last year, the most Googled word in the world was Brisbane. We welcome that because people are looking to us. They want to know where we are, they want to know about us, and they want to know what Brisbane and Queensland has to offer. It also delivered, that announcement alone, delivered an estimated $170 million in free publicity, and we're looking to deliver more of that over the golden decade ahead. But securing the Games is worth far more than that. Winning the Games provides our tourism sector with an unprecedented opportunity to showcase our state to the world, not just for the next 10 years, but for the decades to follow. This once-in-a-lifetime transformative event will deliver more than $8.1 billion in economic benefit to Queensland. That includes a $4.6 billion economic boost to tourism and trade, and a statewide approach to the Games, which is absolutely fundamental and is a critical part of what we will do as a government, will benefit tourism operators and businesses from Cowan all the way down to Coolangatta. Millions of people are now eager to find out more about our beautiful state, and there will be many investors looking to us as well for tourism investment opportunities. We look forward to working with you, supporting you and helping you drive that growth. We cannot do it on our own. The most critical thing we can do as a government is not get out of the road, but is to pave the road for tourism operators and tourism investors, because that, working together, that is the way we will strengthen and grow our vitally important tourism industry in Queensland. So again, thanks for being part of our Investor Forum today. This is not the end, this is just the beginning of an ongoing conversation about how we can support you and generate greater investment in our vitally important tourism sector in Queensland. Thank you.
Thank you, Treasurer, for setting the scene. It's definitely an exciting time to invest in Queensland. Next, I would like to introduce Mr. James Luddington, Director from BDA Marketing Planning. James will highlight some of the key data of Queensland's economic recovery and forecast tourism growth out to 2032 and what's in between. James has more than 19 years' experience as a consultant at BDA and specialises in the tourism sector. Please welcome James.
Well, good morning, everyone. Firstly, I'd just like to thank the Treasurer and the Department for the opportunity to speak with you today. As you've heard, my name is James Luddington, and I'm from BDA Marketing Planning, and I've been asked to speak with you about the status, and particularly the outlook for tourism demand in Queensland in the coming years. So first of all, just having a look at a few key indicators here in relation to the consumer economy, the relevance, of course, being that tourism forms a component of household consumer spending. Starting off on the left-hand side, we can see disposable household income has grown consistently each quarter in recent years, and that's despite the economic turmoil that we've seen as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. And this obviously varies by individual and by industry, but economy-wide, that growth has been quite consistent, obviously supported by JobKeeper through the pandemic period. Household consumption has varied a lot more. You can see the sharp downturns there in consumption as a result of the lockdowns that we've seen, generally followed by a strong recovery in the subsequent quarters, and that's what we saw to the end of 2021. One of the key things about the pandemic period has been that consumers have been saving a higher proportion of their income, particularly in the lockdown quarters, but also in the other quarters, the savings as a share of income has been higher than we were seeing pre-COVID. And in the last 12 months alone, income has exceeded expenditure by around $200 billion. So while there are some challenges facing consumers at the moment with rising inflation, potentially rising interest rates, we think this pool of savings should help provide some resilience to tackle these challenges in the coming years. So just looking now at recent tourism demand for Queensland, focusing on tourism expenditure across three demand streams: intrastate expenditure, expenditure from interstate visitors, and expenditure from international visitors. And we can see that prior to COVID, domestic demand was growing quite strongly, both from within the state and from other Australian states. International demand had also seen strong growth over the decade, though it had slowed somewhat in 2019. Then the pandemic obviously hit, impacting all of the demand streams. Intrastate, however, has bounced back strongly and grown in excess of pre-COVID levels to the end of 2021, with the border restrictions obviously limiting where Queenslanders can travel. That's obviously been to the benefit of intrastate demand. Interstate was impacted more severely and has so far recovered only some of that lost expenditure. And international demand obviously fell to practically zero with the borders closed, and that remained the status to the end of 2021 with the latest data available there. So just having a look now at some key consumer metrics that we track on a regular basis. And here we have the relative levels of consideration and intention to visit each Australian state or territory among those who don't live in that state or territory, so taking an interstate perspective. The first thing we can see is that Queensland has the highest level of consideration intention among its interstate population across the country. In addition, we can see that consideration and intention are both increasing in recent times for Queensland, which is a real positive. New South Wales and Victoria are the closest competitors there across both of the metrics, but both of those did lose some ground through the pandemic period. Victoria recovering a little in recent times. Looking at some of the smaller states, most of those did see some increases through the pandemic period, but just levelling or coming off a little bit in recent times. So just moving on now to some demand forecasts. So just a couple of points here to explain the outlooks and the scenarios that we'll go through. So firstly, our primary output is what we call a hold share outlook, where we forecast demand opportunity in each demand stream. That is, how much we think demand opportunity out of each market will grow. The hold share outlook for Queensland then assumes that Australia and Queensland will hold share of forecast demand opportunity for each international market, and that Queensland will hold share of the forecast interstate demand opportunity. In the intrastate market, where we're not competing so directly with other destinations, demand is forecast in line with the historical economic drivers and the historical relationship with those economic drivers. We then create several scenarios where we vary that hold share assumption. The upper scenario assumes that Queensland returns to its peak share that we saw in the decade pre-COVID, while the lower scenario projects the historical share trend into the future, and for intrastate assumes that household consumption will fall to be in line with the national average. So just starting off with the intrastate forecast, so the forecast of expenditure by Queenslanders within the state. So I mentioned earlier on that we've seen a strong recovery post-COVID in intrastate expenditure. However, now that the borders are open and Queenslanders are able to travel more freely, we're not expecting that level of growth to continue in the short term. However, the hold share outlook does still provide for solid growth out to 2030, with annual growth just over 3% on average. Looking at the different scenarios there, under the lower scenario, there's not much growth expected, but under the upper scenario, we're up to nearly 5% annual growth. Looking at interstate demand, obviously was much more impacted by COVID, but the forecast is for interstate demand to recover in the coming 1 to 2 years and reach pre-COVID levels of demand by 2023 under that hold share outlook. Positive growth is forecast thereafter, with all scenarios seeing some growth, but obviously the hold share and the upper scenario looking more positive in that sort of 3 to 5% annual growth range. International demand now, obviously hardest hit by COVID, and while demand is forecast to recover in the coming years, it is expected to take several years to reach the pre-COVID levels. So looking at around 2025, early to mid-2025 for getting back to those pre-COVID levels of expenditure. Positive outlook thereafter if Queensland can at least hold or ideally gain share. So just having a look at the forecast demand opportunity now in some individual international markets, and we've just got 8 key markets here. So firstly, just to explain the graph, along the horizontal axis, we're looking at the projected volume to 2030 on a hold share basis, while on the vertical axis is the relative average annual growth we would expect from each market. So we can see that China has a strong volume outlook, and this is because China represented a large volume of demand pre-COVID, and with the growth prospects still quite positive, at least in the medium to longer term when travel resumes, and the assumption that Australia and Queensland hold share of that demand, the resulting demand to 2030 is also quite substantial. India is the strongest growth market, while Taiwan and the USA also have good growth prospects. New Zealand, Japan, UK and Germany remain important volume markets, but have somewhat lower growth prospects relative to some of those other markets. So just putting all of the demand streams together now, the outlook for total Queensland expenditure is $37 billion by 2030 under the hold share scenario. The upper scenario would see Queensland lifting to $43 billion, while expenditure would be expected to reach $31 billion under that lower scenario. So you can see there is a $12 billion gap between the lower and upper scenarios just in the year of 2030. So that's the difference that competitive performance can make. So just finally, a few key points to summarise the presentation today. So consumer income has continued to grow fairly consistently through the pandemic, but a much higher proportion of that income has been saved in that period than we were seeing prior to COVID. I think this provides consumers with a pool of savings which should provide some resilience against some of the challenges that consumers are facing at the moment, including rising cost of living and the potential for further interest rate increases. Queensland demand volume generally grew solidly across the demand streams in the decade prior to COVID. In the couple of years prior to COVID, domestic demand was particularly strong. The consumer indicators also show that the state has strong appeal, which is also now improving in recent times relative to some of the other states and territories. We think there's substantial growth opportunity which exists to 2030 as economies recover and borders open. Interstate and international demand is forecast to recover in the coming years from a low base brought about by the pandemic. Intrastate has been strong with that captive market, and that recent growth is forecast to slow, but still further growth opportunity is forecast out to 2030. The resulting growth for Queensland will depend on competitive performance, so holding competitive performance constant moving forward, Queensland is forecast to reach $37 billion in overnight visitor expenditure at 2030. But a $12 billion range of expenditure outcomes exists across those scenarios that we showed you, and that's dependent on the competitive performance of the state. So look, overall, we certainly think there's substantial opportunity, particularly if Queensland can outperform competitive destinations in the coming years. So look, we'll leave it there. Thanks again, everyone.
Thank you, James, for that really interesting presentation. We'd like to now show you a short video on investing in Queensland tourism. Following this, we will hear from the Honourable Sterling Hinchliffe MP, Minister for Tourism, Innovation and Sport, and Minister assisting the Premier on Olympics and Paralympic Sport and Engagement.
What does the perfect tourism investment look like to you? Is it a blank slate to make your own? Or is it one with room to grow? Is it about the perfect location? Or the people? Or the wow? Does it move fast or go steady? Do you invest in its future or its history? Is it about expanding your options or the perfect timing? Whatever your perfect tourism investment looks like, you'll find it here in Queensland. Queensland, perfect for tourism investment.
Thank you. I'd like to thank you for the opportunity to address you today, and I want to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we gather and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. Also acknowledge my parliamentary colleagues, the Treasurer and Minister for Trade and Investment and the Assistant Minister for Treasury, and our presenters and panellists today. Tourism is a cornerstone of our economy, with Queensland Australia's original holiday destination. The facts are, we have 4 international airports. We have the most ports of any Australian state to accept cruise vessels. We have the people capable to run your business ventures. We have our natural assets such as the Great Barrier Reef, the outback, forests and beautiful beaches, and tropical islands ready to tempt and captivate. And let's not forget that we've got the 2032 Olympic and Paralympic Games. Continued tourism investment by the private sector and government is vital to Queensland's economic recovery as the industry emerges from the impacts of COVID-19 and repositions itself on the road to 2032 and beyond. And Queensland's tourism economic plan is firing. During April, Queenslanders and interstate visitors delivered an estimated $2 billion for Queensland tourism operators and regional jobs. Strong Easter travel saw Queensland airports recording their busiest days since the pandemic, and occupancy rates in some destinations exceeding pre-COVID levels. As the Treasurer has outlined, since the onset of COVID-19, the Palaszczuk government has committed over $1.1 billion in economic recovery and support for the tourism and events sector. The Palaszczuk government continues to stand shoulder to shoulder with tourism operators to ensure all our destinations are fully recovering and positioned for growth. And I've literally just arrived from welcoming the first cruise ship back to Queensland since the pandemic shutdown, as was mentioned by Cameron. We continue to see green shoots emerging from strong levels of investment interest from both international and domestic investors who are confident in Queensland's tourism recovery and want to invest in its future. For example, the development and repositioning of some of our island resorts, along with new experiences such as the reef sleep in the Whitsundays. Major development on the Gold Coast with construction now underway for the luxury Mondarian Hotel. New developments being planned for the Spit at Main Beach and the world's first beachfront Langham Hotel to be debuted on the Gold Coast later this month. In the state's north, new and refurbished hotels right across Cairns and beyond, including reopening of the luxury Silky Oaks Lodge. Following our government's $200 million plus commitment last term to growing tourism infrastructure, we've seen new products spring up right across our regions, the lifeblood of our tourism industry. There's been over $2.1 billion in airport upgrades across Queensland, which will open up the state even further for more travellers, more than ever before. And the Department of Tourism, Innovation and Sport has a dedicated tourism investment team
ready to assist current and potential investors with tourism developments, as they've done for a long time already. We have also refreshed our regional snapshots and tourism investor information online to reflect our current positioning and to help new investors begin their journey with us. Last year, our government established an industry reference panel to identify the medium to long-term actions needed to position Queensland for success after the pandemic. Queensland's Tourism Industry Reference Panel delivered an interim action report for tourism recovery in October 2021, and we've been working to progress their recommendations, one of which aligns with today's event, calling for an enhanced focus on investment attraction. The final action plan will provide a blueprint for industry and government to redefine how we do tourism in Queensland over the next 10 years, leading to 2032. Some 3,703 days until the opening ceremony for the 2032 Olympic Games. As Tourism Minister and Sports Minister, I'm very pleased to be supporting the Premier with the delivery of the 2032 Games. They represent a unique opportunity for government to work with industry, businesses and communities to drive growth and investment. Brisbane 2032 will be a positive Games, a climate positive Games. Local industry and businesses will play a critical role in achieving that aim. Queensland has a once-in-a-lifetime, once-in-a-generation opportunity to seize on a decade's worth of possibility, to help Queensland's skills, diversify our economy and create jobs. 6 new venues will be developed, including the Brisbane Arena at Roma Street, 4 community hub facilities and the Redland Whitewater Centre. 8 existing venues will receive major upgrades, including the Gabba, Sleeman Sports Complex and Barlow Park in Cairns. Athlete villages in Brisbane, on the Gold Coast and Sunshine Coast will be delivered in partnership with the private sector. Olympic events will also be held in Toowoomba, Cairns and Townsville. All of this as we plan for another 1.5 million people who are expected to call South East Queensland home by 2041. So friends, the opportunity to seize on this investment and growth in Queensland over the next 10 years is unparalleled. And I really thank you for the time today, and it's time for me to be a part of this conversation about investment in Queensland tourism. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister Hinchliffe, a strong advocate for tourism in our state. We will now have a presentation from Dr. Sarah Hunter from KPMG, who will provide us with an update on the economic drivers and investment trends across the global and local landscape relating to the tourism industry. Sarah is a senior economist and partner at KPMG, a well-recognised organisation operating in more than 146 countries and territories and employing more than 227,000 people. Sarah has significant experience in analysing and forecasting economic trends, which aids various sectors with their growth, both locally and on the global stage. Please join me in welcoming Sarah.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here, and it's such a beautiful day in Brisbane as well, and I can confirm it's definitely warmer and sunnier here than it was in Sydney when I left yesterday. So I thought I'd give quite a broad presentation and a nice compliment, I hope, to James's comments earlier on the specifics around consumption and the tourism recovery, and just look more broadly at what the opportunities are for Australia, and within that, of course, Queensland. And I can't go too much further without at least talking about the economic recovery and how strong it has been, starting off in Australia, and this is the chart you're looking at on the screen right now, and I promise on the next slide, show you Queensland within that. But Australia has really outperformed through the last couple of years. The pandemic has been challenging for everyone, of course, but the Treasurer made reference to our public health response across the country, generally speaking, compared to globally. It was very strong, very effective. And we put that together with lots of supportive policy, particularly from state and the federal government as well. And we've seen a really strong drive on GDP. And GDP now is comfortably above pre-COVID levels. And not all, in fact, most developed economies can't say the same. So it's been a very strong performance for Australia generally. And Queensland is very definitely outpacing that national average, which is the chart you can see here. I've just normalised all the states so that they're all anchored to 100 at the end of 2019. Queensland line's a little hard to see, but it's in there with South Australia. And I have to say, without the floods, which put a a significant dent in activity in the first 3 months of this year, and obviously natural disasters are beyond anyone's control. Without that, Queensland would have been much closer to WA, so don't take that as a sign that things are not performing here. They really are, but obviously events like that are a bit extreme. So it's a very positive story for Queensland, generally speaking, within that positive Australia story more broadly. And one of the main drivers of this actually has been a sharp turnaround in net internal migration flows. People in Australia, the locals, have been moving here in significant numbers over the last couple of years. Queensland normally receives positive inflows from the other states, particularly from New South Wales, but that trend has really ticked up markedly over the last 12 months, as you can see on the chart. This matters because these are people that are moving here for the economic opportunities, for the jobs that the state has been creating. The Treasurer made reference, in fact, to how many jobs have been created here, and it's a virtuous circle because people move into the region, they come here for work, but then they're spending through the economy and creating jobs themselves. And also, obviously, in the tourism sector, particularly with borders closed, they're creating jobs in the tourism and hospitality sector specifically. It's a very positive performance for the economy over the last couple of years. I also wanted to briefly, again, cross over a little bit with James, but not spend too long on this. The hospitality and travel spending is now very much in recovery mode. Indeed, nationally, household spending on transport services, which is where air travel sits, that grew by 60%, 60, in the first 3 months of this year. Admittedly off a low base, clearly, because we were coming out of lockdowns, but it does show you how strong the underlying demand for that type of activity is. And as James mentioned, households, notwithstanding some of the inflationary pressures, rising interest rates, I will get to those in a second, they're pretty well placed to start to normalise their spending patterns, and that particularly is beneficial for tourism, hospitality and travel, and we can see that in terms of the recovery trajectories on the chart at the moment. Just to drill down a little bit into domestic travel specifically, I think this chart's quite interesting. This is airline passenger numbers domestically through Australia as a whole. And you can see the sharp upturns, but two upturns, though, that we've had post-lockdown. I wanted to show this because I think that's an important point to make. When Australians can travel, we do like to travel. I'll certainly put my hand up and say I've had a couple of trips since I was able to get out of Sydney at the end of last year. I'm not alone in this. So once we're presented with the opportunity, it is something that we want to do. And we know domestic travel actually is the single biggest component of total tourism spending through Australia. That's not to say the internationals don't matter, they really do. But as a whole, domestic is a key market, and the recovery is there and is already emerging. So I expect if I update this chart in a few months' time, I'll have a continuation of that very strong trend there. I also wanted to talk a little bit about investment into Queensland and to Australia more broadly and what's happening with that. And I think certainly if you go back into the sort of historic period a few years in the past, there was definitely a view overseas that money would come into mining. Very attractive, obviously lots of really strong returns there. And that was it, though, wasn't it? There wasn't much else going on. Well, no, not true across the whole country. And for Queensland in particular, Queensland, I think, is actually a fascinating state. It looks a lot like the Australian economy as a whole. Yes, there's a mining sector, clearly, but it's a very diverse, broad economy, lots of different sectors of which tourism is one. And certainly, if I look at the investment trends and flows, this is starting to be recognised, if you like, globally. The FDI inflows are now much broader than they were in the past. Mining's still important. And mining through that climate change transition, which I'll get to later on, is going to have an important role to play. But there are many, many opportunities that investors are now looking to take advantage of, and Australia offers attractive returns, being a relatively robustly growing, developed economy, good institutional environment. So the fundamentals are solid, and the growth performance is generally better than the average. I can't give an economic update at the moment and not at least talk about inflation and then interest rates. Has to happen. But I think, and it is here as you'd expect it to see, the inflationary pressures are building, and there's no doubt about that. They are partly a global story, which I'll get to in a second. They're also, though, a domestic story as well. We are slowly but surely starting to see a pickup in wages growth, for instance, and other domestic pressures, which is now getting into our inflation rates. But I think the important point to make here is that a good chunk of what we're seeing in terms of inflation is coming through because the economy is strong. Inflation is challenging for households, no doubt. We are going to have to see some slowing in growth momentum at least. But these domestic inflation pressures are really here because of strong demand, strength in the economy. So it's not necessarily a bad news story, although for individuals it doesn't always feel good, and I understand that completely. So part of what we're seeing is, as I mentioned, it is an international supply-side shock story. But even here, Australia as a country, we're relatively well placed to weather these things, notwithstanding some very specific disruptions that we've seen in our local energy markets just recently. And there are very specific reasons for that. They're not actually too connected with what's happening internationally. We are actually better placed than particularly Europe to weather the storm. We're not so reliant on Russian oil and natural gas supplies, for example. We're also not so reliant on the European supply chain, which is also being significantly disrupted by what's happening in Ukraine. So the challenge for us here is less. And I don't mean to sort of dismiss or lessen what's happening on a very human level in Europe. It's clearly an absolute tragedy, but just through that economic lens, it's a slightly more solid position for us here in Australia. So what does all of this mean then for interest rates? Well, they are on the rise, maybe 1.5% at the end of this year for the cash rate, maybe 2.25%, 2.5% in a year's time or thereabouts. But again, it's in relative terms, this is still an attractive market. We're still relatively well placed through all of this. And we're not the only country that's going through this. And you can see New Zealand, for example, running well ahead. So conditions there are much more challenging around that piece for consumers and households. So yes, it's going to get tougher, but all thinking of that in a relative context. I wanted to finish up with a few comments on looking beyond the sort of very near term, beyond that COVID recovery and those inflationary pressures and what have you. What are some of the underlying economic trends and how do they create some positive flows through for tourism in particular? Well, there we go. I think I can't be an economist and talk about structural change and not talk about climate change and climate change transition. It's clearly risen rapidly up the policy agenda. Now, for some parts of the economy, there is going to be challenge here, and there's no sort of shying away or hiding from that. But having a proper framework in place, and hopefully that's something our new government can give us on what that transition looks like, will really help manage that process. But it also will create opportunities, many, many opportunities, in fact. And for some of Queensland's tourism assets, in fact, there might be a dual opportunity here. If I think about the Great Barrier Reef, it's a wonderful place to go and visit. I remember my first time, blew my mind with what you can see and do with the snorkeling. But it's also an incredibly important natural capital asset. Protecting it will actually help the climate transition and obviously support the tourism sector too as a place and a destination to go and visit. So there are lots of positive symbiotic benefits to tourism and to the natural environment that we will have the potential to take advantage of and that investors certainly can be looking at. I also wanted to talk a little bit about how the pandemic seems to be changing our patterns or the way we live and work and spend our lives. And again, I think there are opportunities here, particularly around travel, particularly servicing perhaps the intrastate markets and the interstate markets, which, as James was saying, was so powerful and so important. One of the really interesting things is that we have just about returned to our normal patterns around going to work, going on holiday, into retail, hospitality settings, arts, recreation. If you go out to any of the footy games, you'll see the crowds are definitely back. But we're a bit more cautious when it comes to public transport, particularly actually trains and buses. So just thinking about that and what that might mean. But it doesn't mean that we don't want to go out and have fun and get away from it all. We're just doing it in a slightly different way. And so that, again, creates some opportunities for where you might want to look about investing and how you might want to position your business through that and the markets that you target. And then finally, just thinking about the Queensland economy more broadly and what might be the opportunities there. And again, thinking of tourism and hospitality as servicing some of these other sectors which are going to attract people and jobs into the region. Well, there's a lot of concern and I suppose uncertainty around the geopolitical environment and shifting relationships and reshoring of production, or what's been called friendshoring. This is where governments might start thinking about how they can position and develop supply chains with countries where they have really strong diplomatic ties and political links in that way. It sounds scary, but actually there's opportunities there. If we're talking about onshoring or friendshoring, this for advanced manufacturing in a state like Queensland, Australia more broadly, is a very positive story. That's going to bring in high value, high income jobs. People in that bracket, they're the ones who then have the dollars to spend in terms of going travelling around Queensland, travelling around Australia more broadly. So it's thinking about those sort of opportunities, I think, that could be really interesting for investors in this sector and what that might look like. Perhaps it's a different type of investment, a different type of tourism project, and others on the panel will have much more than I do to say about that. But there are opportunities within all of this as well as challenge, and that's, as an economist, always really interesting and fascinating for me to be looking at. So thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be chatting to you today.
Thank you, Sarah. That was a really insightful presentation, and certainly we're seeing positive outlook for Queensland. We now move on to our panel, which is being led by Tanya Neville, Senior Project Manager at Articulus. Tanya will aim to provide you with insights from our incredible panellists, including the unique advantages of the tourism sector in Queensland and the roles played by various industries and how they can help grow the industry. Tanya will be moderating the panel session as well as introducing our panellists. We welcome questions from you during the panel discussion, so just a reminder, if you would like to ask a question or make a comment, you can click the thought bubble icon on the bottom right-hand corner of your screen. Please join me in welcoming Tanya and our panel for today.
Thank you so much, Cherie, and hello to everyone participating in this important Queensland Tourism Investment Forum today. It is indeed a beautiful day, and wow, aren't we lucky to be living in Queensland with all of this fabulous information about how our economy is going, and we're going to be hearing from how wonderful the other parts of the factors of tourism are today. Can I firstly thank the Assistant Minister for Treasury, the Treasurer and Minister for Tourism, Innovation and Sport, and their amazing departmental staff who are committed to tourism investment in our beautiful state for the benefit of all of us. So that's fantastic. I'd also like to thank you for the opportunity of moderating such an impressive panel. As an urban designer, I'm not only passionate about Queensland, I've been fortunate enough to work in a lot of projects within Queensland in this diverse, beautiful, wonderful natural and urban environments. Some that have taken up to 20 years to actually realise, and we'll talk about some of those later, particularly Howard Smith Wharves. So it is my great pleasure to introduce to you today the panel who not only represent the most fabulous organisations, but people who are passionate about Queensland, about tourism and the visitor experience, underpinning a sustainable tourism industry and future. So today on the panel we have Clark Kirby, CEO from Village Roadshow, passionate about lots of things, including being on the Gold Coast, which is wonderful. David Asif, the Managing Director of Spices Retreats, a very exciting new offer that we have, which is wonderful. Adam Flaskas, Director and Founder of the Howard Smith Wharves. It's wonderful development, and we'll hear more about that today. And Gert Jan de Graaf, CEO of the Airport Corporation, with many, many wonderful experiences around the world to share with us. And of course, the senior economist, Sarah Hunter, and partner at KPMG, who we've already heard from today with some great insights in the global economic drivers and trends. So thank you all for joining us today. Investing in Queensland. A big part of Queensland's success as both an attractive tourism and investment destination is because of the confidence of our private sector in the industry. So I would actually like to start with you, Clark. Village Roadshow Theme Parks is the leading theme park operator in Australia, which has its headquarters, as I mentioned, on the beautiful Gold Coast. We're operating a number of iconic theme parks, along with the attractions and film studios. It's great to see you're continuing to invest in the future with a pipeline of new attractions. So my question is, could you tell us briefly about your current investment strategy and future opportunities in boosting Gold Coast tourism?
Certainly. Well, firstly, thank you for having me today. It's a great privilege. I'd probably actually, if you don't mind, I'll take you back. I actually came to Queensland myself in about 2016 to take over as CEO of Village Roadshow Theme Parks. It was a great honour. I loved being on the Gold Coast. I loved Queensland. I loved being part of this wonderful state. We did have some great success over those years. And in the start of 2020, I actually took over the group CEO role, which previously to that was based in Melbourne. The proviso of taking over that role was that I would, if I could relocate, make sure I could stay in Queensland, because I did see that Queensland is the future of our company. There is so much growth, so much potential. If I'd known we were going into a 2-year global pandemic, I may have asked for a few more demands, I have to admit. But really, we did, look, it was obviously a very, very tough couple of years for everyone around the country, but certainly for the tourism industry. We had a wonderful working relationship with the government. Really helped us navigate our way through that pandemic and allowed us to continue to invest right through that pandemic. And as the Treasurer mentioned before, we not only built a brand new slide complex at Wet n Wild, we're also in the final stages of creating an entire new precinct at SeaWorld. And what we try to do as Village Roadshow, we do try to create the world's best. So everything that we do, whether it be our studios here on the Gold Coast, for our theme parks and new attractions, we do want to create the world's best attractions. We have another new precinct going into Movie World, which we can't really announce yet, but a little sneak preview there. But it's going to be very, very exciting. Really reimagine what everyone knows Movie World as today. On top of that, we are looking at, as you're aware, we already operate SeaWorld Hotel, which is one of the highest occupancies of any hotel around Australia. And we are, and as the Treasurer mentioned, we're trading at our hotels and at our theme parks at above pre-COVID levels now. So we are actively, in final stages of planning for a 500-room hotel out alongside Movie World with a 1,000-seat convention centre there too. So still looking at further development onto our studio, world-class studios there also. And it's just that belief on how much growth and what a wonderful state this is to invest in.
Clark, that is fantastic. And we're so glad to have you and to take you back from Melbourne or to have you stay in Queensland. It's wonderful. And we're really looking forward to hearing about that very exciting precinct at Movie World. So obviously it's Gold Coast tourism that we mentioned there, but I think you've actually, you're helping us all here in Queensland attract much more than just to the Gold Coast. So it's absolutely fantastic. Well, thanks so much, Clark. Now I would like to ask you, David, about the Fabulous Spices Retreats. We know the Spices brand and the offering is synonymous with what you've called a relaxed luxury across your retreats. You've grown these retreats from 3 in southeast Queensland to 10 retreats across Queensland and now New South Wales. Research shows us that the natural attributes are highly desirable with investors and operators, and you're able to leverage those attributes clearly with your exceptional dining experiences and also other nature-based activities. We understand you've expanded those experiences with the Scenic Rim Trail Walk, which sounds fantastic, and eco cabins, which also highlight these attributes. So my question to you is, with the company's bigger push towards sustainability and reducing emissions, can you tell us about the group's initiatives and how they may impact on your visitor experience? And, I know it's a long question, but plans for future investment or expansion? Thanks, David.
Yeah, thanks, Tanya. It's really nice to be here and appreciate the invitation. I guess the Spices experience has always been about the environment and showcasing and sharing the natural wonder of nature, but showing that in a sustainable way. We sleep, feed, bed over 100,000 guests every year, so it's our opportunity to allow these guests and show these guests a small way to give back in sustainability. So we're fortunate in that respect because we know that this is bigger than us when it comes to sustainability. We do need the assistance and help from everyone we touch and see, and we really see that through our guests. We have some fairly ambitious goals when it comes to our sustainability. I think since we introduced the Scenic Rim Trail, which, it literally opened March when the pandemic hit, shut, then went from 0 to 100 very quickly with 4 departures a week currently. It's showcasing some of the best natural environment in Australia. The Gondwana rainforest, which is World Heritage listed, is only an hour and a half from this beautiful city. So it's been a great opportunity for us to test and put our green lens over sustainability, over infrastructure, to ensure that our touch point, our light touch when it comes to our businesses is very much on point. So 3 initiatives that we have that we're working towards by 2030 is by 2025, across our 10 retreats, we hope to have 0 net waste to landfill. By 2026, we hope to reduce our water consumption by 25%. I know it's not a real issue right now, but the droughts will come, El Niño will leave us. So being regional properties, water is a resource that should be cherished. And lastly, we're aiming for 0 net emissions by 2030. So how do we go about this? Look, you've got to start somewhere. We started 4 years ago and started plugging the obvious leaks with the upgrade of lighting, refrigeration, air conditioning. And then we also introduced our sustainability green team right across the retreats, so which have been very well received. The team can influence so much, and we call them our green hornets. There's 2 to 4 at every property that are the eyes and ears for us when it comes to ensuring that we're doing things in a sustainable way. And that, whether that be working with our Mallow Waste, the Scouts for recycling, ensuring lights are off in conference rooms, air conditioning switched off. It's all those little touches. And then it's also the little touches and influence we have with our guests, them understanding the way we work, building beds, building garden beds, I should say, understanding the importance of water in regional property. We have a little sticker on the mirrors there, so, sing 2 songs and that's the length of your shower. But we don't want to impact on the guest experience. Being a luxury brand, it's really important that their stay is enjoyable. Some of the energy and infrastructure that we've put in, the renewable energy, we've put in around 130, connecting back to the grid, 130 kilowatts of energy, so which will reduce our consumption considerably. Over 7,000, actually this is a stat from Peak Lodge, which I can see the gap from here on this beautiful day in Queensland. Peak Lodge has for the last quarter, saved over 7,000 hours, which was equivalent of energy use, which was equivalent to lighting up 5 Brisbane homes. So we're constantly pushing forward in that sustainability space. We know the consumer's interested in it. We're very passionate about it and believe that we want to influence business and influence, in particular, hospitality and tourism, that they take that light touch when it comes to tourism. Lastly, we're investing in the future. So we're probably 3 key things that we're doing feasibility on at the moment and working and partnering with is hydrogen. To reduce, hydrogen has such a huge capacity and capability for running anything and everything. So certainly reducing the diesel consumption and hopefully remove it altogether in time. We also have our, the team love this one, the electric mowers. So, working with products to mow the vast acres that we have via battery. So, lots of fun stuff like that. And the latest feasibility that we're working on is geothermal heating and cooling. So how can we heat and cool our properties in a different way? So, lots happening.
Absolutely right. That is amazing. Thank you so much for sharing that with us, David. Not that I'm going to join your marketing team, but I see Green Hornet, Village Roadshows. There's something in that quite potentially. But seeing you looking at the zero net net goal is absolutely fantastic. And as you say, there's lots of people interested in that space. So having that experience to have a holiday and really engage in that type of activity is fantastic. So thank you for sharing that with us. I will now move to a local icon here in Brisbane, which is a phenomenal success, Adam, as well as his Howard Smith Wharves. Adam, you and the team at Howard Smith Wharves have worked closely with government and have delivered a great example of how the right type of precinct in a great location can help drive a city's destination demand. You've also created a destination in itself which is well known for its food, high quality food and beverage experiences across 13 venues, which is so impressive. It's a great location, it's a great story. In your experience, we want to understand what the elements of the developments like Howard Smith Wharves that make it an iconic destination, and what plans you might have for the precinct in the future. Clearly, there's been a few little hiccups with COVID, pandemics and floods, but I think what we've seen is so phenomenal. I can't wait to hear it. Thank you, Adam.
Thank you, Tanya. And thank you, Treasurer, Minister and team. It's a privilege to be invited to sit on the panel today, and I'm super impressed listening and enjoying the support from state government and what they're doing for tourism in Queensland. Howard Smith Wharves, it was a big vision. It's been an 8-year journey. My business partner and I, put our life savings and a lot of hard work, blood, sweat and tears into the precinct. The working with government has been fantastic. Also, right through COVID, support we were given with state government was very important, and we were lucky enough to be in one of the next phases doing a 300 linear metre pontoon, of which state government we've received a grant of $5.5 million to go towards. But the initial sort of journey of Howard Smith Wharves, running a precinct and opening a precinct from a greenfield site like that has its challenges. It was a heritage site, so there was a significant amount of time in design and heritage, and really I was sort of looking after everything from design, construction, opening, travelling around Australia, recruiting sort of 1,000 odd employees upon opening, and luckily it was embraced by the state and the locals, and we had around 10 million visitors through the precinct in the first 12 months. And something like 20 million online global views on social media. So we were absolutely thrilled and very proud of our team and the precinct and working with government through the opening. Luckily, we had that first 12 months of trade before we had to close down for the global pandemic. We were able to survive, we adapted, and we made sure we focused on turning some of the negatives of COVID and things into positives. We've come out the other side, and we've had in the last 5 weeks, record weeks that we've ever had at Howard Smith Wharves. And that's so exciting to see the back of some of those hardships. And during this period of COVID, I guess there were times of having time to reflect and look at our business, and we invested hundreds of millions of dollars into the first stage of Howard Smith Wharves. And as you know, in tourism and in hospitality, if you aren't reinvesting in your business, things can change rapidly. In hospitality, if the offering or you're not reinvesting, within 6 months, the business can really change. So we've come up with an exciting new vision. and dream to take Howard Smith Wharves to the next evolution, reinvesting a further up to $500 million into this next stage, of which we would have a further 20 different world-class restaurant and bar offerings, with a luxury hotel, event theatre space to hold 2,500 people, some more event space, but all within the current envelope, keeping 80% of the site as open space. So we've been working very hard on this, and in the coming 2 months I look forward to sitting with a number of people within state government and tourism and sharing our vision and dreams. Along with that, we will be doing we're going to probably increase the length of the pontoon to around 500 lineal metres, of which we will launch a number of different tourism and boating experiences. Howard Smith Wharves will be then very much seen as the gateway to the Brisbane River and Moreton Bay, and we see, apart from reinvesting and believing in the precinct of Howard Smith Wharves, we also see a massive opportunity, as government does, and a lot of people don't really realise this, but we have the 4 largest sand islands in the world in our backyard, being Moreton Island, North and South Stradbroke Island and Fraser Island. And I know that a lot of people from down south, friends of mine that have come up to Brisbane and experienced Queensland during COVID, have been absolutely blown away by how much Brisbane and Queensland has evolved. I really feel this wave of excitement. Everyone's feeling it. It's an amazing job winning the Olympics in 2032 and the Paralympics. So we really have this incredible opportunity. It feels so exciting to be living in Queensland and Brisbane and to have businesses here. And we have an opportunity, if we make decisions and get on with some of these dreams, we have this opportunity to really showcase this city and state at its absolute best. And that's why we're passionate about further investing in our business and our offerings in this state. So thank you.
Wow. Thank you, Adam. That's phenomenal. It's wonderful to hear that you can build on that success, even with a few little speed bumps that you might have had with those other issues that we just mentioned. But certainly the River City, the coin of the River City has been celebrated by the success of Howard Smith Wharves, and we're really excited to see that next new phase that you talk about. We are excited. I think I'm going to turn into Big Kev and be so thrilled to be a Queenslander. Thanks, Adam. Thanks so much. Now, over to you, Gert-Jan. It's great to have you here today. And it's great to see our aviation sector, again, being able to take off, as it were, and the skies opening up, and not with rain, but with flights coming in and out. Brisbane Airport, as the gateway to Queensland, is vital for both international and domestic access, but also a key artery for dispersing all to our regions. With over 2,500 hectares of land, which is approximately the size of Manhattan, the corporation is responsible for a continuous investment into the airport, and that is evident in ensuring a world-class airport for Brisbane and the broader Queensland region. A significant achievement has been made by the corporation with this massive investment in the construction of the second runway. What investment plans do you have that you want to maximise these opportunities with this new development, particularly as we head towards 2032? I know you get excited about this, Gert-Jan, and I'm excited to hear your response.
Thank you for the introduction, Tanya. Treasurer Dick, Minister Hinchcliffe and Assistant Minister Mullen, thank you very much for having us today. It's pretty exciting to hear all these guys talking a lot about their exciting future plans for tourism in Queensland. We, Brisbane Airport Corporation, do have some ambitious plans as well, and I'm very happy to share them with you today. Yes, 2020 was always going to be a big year for Brisbane Airport with the opening of the runway. Unfortunately, it became a big year for another reason, but we don't talk about that. We talk about the future today. Brisbane Airport is what I call an airport city. It's more than just an airport. There are also many other activities that are being developed at the airport. And that's reflected in our investment program for the airport. An airport is an enabler of economic, social and cultural prosperity of the region. And that's our core business. That's what we do best. So we're investing in our core aeronautical facilities. And to give you an indication of our investment program for the future years, we've committed $2.5 billion for the next 5 years, and even more than that in the 5 years after, because we need a new terminal that will be built before the Olympics. So I'm talking about more than $5 billion in the next decade into Brisbane Airport. A lot of that is aeronautical. As I said before, we need to develop a new terminal, but also upgrades of the existing terminals in terms of retail, security, and parking and transport services. So that's on the way. But we're also investing in other activities at Brisbane Airport to make it that airport city, to make it a very attractive place to work, but also to visit. To give you an indication of the workers we're expecting at the airport, today, or 2020, I have to say, we have 24,000 people working in our precinct. We're expecting that increases to 60,000 in the next 30 years. So in 2050, we will see 60,000 people working at the airport for 600 different companies. So we're developing retail precincts to make sure that those people have the amenities, but also things to do when they're not working. Besides that, we're developing Brisbane Airport into a precinct people want to visit, whether they're traveling or whether they live in Brisbane. We are putting up an air show every day, as you know, and a lot of people are coming out to see that. Very well hidden gem at the airport, the Kingsford Smith Memorial. Please visit that. And currently we have in our Skygate precinct a very attractive TFO, but also a golf facility. We will do much more than that in the immediate future. We're talking about an oceanarium, we're talking about active sports facilities. We will expand Skygate further, including the golf facilities. And we will develop an automotive precinct for automotive retail, but more importantly for automotive entertainment as well. And that's just the beginning of what we're doing and how we like to develop Brisbane Airport into a precinct in Brisbane into Queensland that is much more than just a few runways and terminals on the side.
Brilliant. Thank you, Gert-Jan. And it is much more than a couple of runways. It's great to see the changes that have happened, and we look forward to the future changes. All right, I'm going to turn briefly to Sarah, because we're running out of time with such passionate panellists. But Sarah, you've shown us that Queensland is outpacing the national average. So what do you see the role for government to help private sector sustain that momentum?
Yeah, I think government has a key role to play in terms of enabling private sector activity. That's really what it's all about. And that enablement comes through a number of different ways. Some of the other panellists mentioning some of the grants that they've received to help them use their own investment funds and to really take full advantage of that. It's also a question around investing in infrastructure, and that's transport infrastructure is usually a very obvious one, and some of the airport activities fall into that bucket, but also social infrastructure as well. Essentially to make whatever your jurisdiction is, Queensland in this case, somewhere where people want to live and work and come and visit. That's what the government's role is really to do. And so thinking about attracting investment into the region is important, but really what investors want to know is that there's a local labour force that are going to be able to work and provide the services, and that in particular for tourism, obviously, the people are going to want to come and visit because also that infrastructure network works for them as well. So it's really great to hear from the Treasurer and other ministers about the plans that the government has to push in that direction, because as an economist, to me, that should mean that all of the opportunities are fully unlocked.
That is fantastic, and thank you for such a succinct summation on that. That's wonderful. I've just got one more question to to pose to each of you on the panel, possibly the tourism operators or investors themselves, is what is one thing you think we could do better to attract investment to build an industry in Queensland? Can I start with you, Clark? Just in your final summation.
So thank you very much. Well, firstly, I will say that I do think that what I've been very impressed with is the fact that the Queensland government does understand the importance of the tourism industry and the visitor economy, and we do really feel that we are being listened to and we're true partners with the government. Look, I think there can always be an opportunity to cut down red tape. There are challenges. Red tape can be great because we do have we have to protect our natural environment. We have to have very strong safety requirements. But in terms of bold, we want to be as bold as we can. We want to be doing things that are world class, that no one, and not just the greatest in Australia, the things that are greatest in the world. And so to be able to have, I guess, something more of a concierge style approach that can help navigate some of those different levels of government, I think that would be great. But as I said, look, we're so fortunate to be in this state with a government that does see the importance of being bold and doing some really world class things.
Terrific. Thank you so much, Clark. David, did you have?
I'd have to say, thanks, Tanya. Keep it short. Infrastructure. So whatever the developments that we're looking at, that the infrastructure, roads and supporting infrastructure are well built and built for that sustainable future. One, building them sustainably, but ensuring if we're heading west or we're heading to the bay that the access is easy.
Yeah, great. Thank you so much. Adam.
The two things just mentioned by Clark and David, I think are absolutely spot on. Infrastructure is essential and a great thing for state government to be able to help with. An example of that is the fact that you have given us the grant towards the pontoon at Howard Smith Wharves. We now have a vision of wanting to create an offering on Moreton Island and to invest in boats, passenger ferries, to be able to get people there. If the government hadn't have done that, none of those dreams would now become a reality. And the only other thing is, as Clark mentioned, anything that can be done to assist together, collaborating these big visions and ideas, but assist with any red tape cutting or concierge to assist those to become a reality expediently is an absolutely essential. An example is I had a meeting with Hutchinson Builders about our project we're looking to do, which, as I said, $500 million investment. And I was asking him about construction prices because at the moment it's kind of crazy how expensive it is. And I was meeting with John Burleese, their head construction man, and he said, Adam, if you are to be building this in 3 to 4 years, everyone at that point will be in a bit of a frenzy trying to get things finished. He said you need to be building ASAP, or it may become unfundable with costs of construction. So anything that can expedite red tape or approval so that we can get on to doing things now, because the 10 years is going to go super quick. Thanks.
Thank you. Thanks, Adam. That's really, really important. Gert-Jan, do you have any final suggestions?
Yeah, well, I share what's being said before. Red tape reduction always helps. Improve and invest in infrastructure is essential to make it all happen. I think the third part of that is let's make sure that the whole world knows we're open for business. We've got a great product to offer, and we're open for all investors here into Queensland. Because that's what this session is all about, to make sure that people are aware of the perfect opportunities they have to invest in tourism, and to make sure that we and the government and we as the operators here in the government are working together to invest ourselves in the development of tourism into the state. Our expectation is that we will increase traffic at the airport from 24 million passengers in 2020 to 60 million in 2050. That requires a lot of work. But that's what we're good at. We're very good collaborators here in the state. And that's what I want to say. We're focused on the things that we can do better. But what we need to continue is to work together to develop tourism further.
Thank you so much. That's fantastic. 60 million visitors. Wow. Okay. Sarah, do you have any other suggestions for what we could do better?
I echo everything else that everyone has said, but and just to pick up and carry on Gert's point, I think another facet of what the government can really help, as well as signalling that we are open and you can come back now, is to also help businesses and connect businesses with new and emerging markets. It can be sometimes hard to see that when you're deep in the thick of things. So just having that bigger picture and identifying where the growth is, both from an investment and from a visitor perspective, I think is another very powerful enabler.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Sarah. Bigger picture, passionate, bold. Thank you to the panel that sums you up completely. And that was a truly engaging session. And I think you'll all agree we're in a great position to move forward with investing in tourism in Queensland. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Tanya, and to our panel for your insights, for sharing your advice and recent learnings, but most importantly, for your infectious enthusiasm for tourism in Queensland. That was absolutely wonderful. Unfortunately, due to time constraints, we may not have been able to get to all of the questions for our panels, so we will ensure that if you do have questions, please do send them through and we'll make sure our panellists have access to those questions for follow-up contact. We are now coming to the conclusion of our investment forum on tourism. I'd like to thank all of the speakers for their contributions and for joining us today, as well as all of our guests online who've taken the time to join us. I know we have quite a few people online. I hope that this forum has been beneficial to you. May I also thank our host today, the Treasurer and Minister for Trade and Investment, the Honourable Cameron Dick MP, and our Minister for Tourism, the Honourable Sterling Hitchcliffe MP. A recording of this forum will be made available to you shortly via the Invested in Queensland website, as well as been shared with you via a follow-up email, which will include details on how you can get more information or ask those questions or anything spoken about today. Thank you so much for having me as your Master of Ceremonies, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your day.